Trauma recovery is hard, especially when you're in denial. And I was in denial for a long time, especially at the beginning of my journey. And because I was in denial, I would tell myself these little lies, and sometimes I told them to other people. But I'm not really sure if lie is the right word to use, because a lot of these things I kind of just believed to be true at the time. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to use the word lie. Lie number one, I'm okay. I used to tell myself this lie, and I also told it to anybody who asked me how I was doing. It just always seemed easier to say, I'm doing okay, whenever anybody asked me how I was doing. And a lot of times I would also add in, I'm okay, but I'm just tired. And the reason I would add in that I was tired was because I know that I looked exhausted. So it was just easier to tell people that I was tired because I knew that I looked exhausted, and that way nobody asked me any more questions about it. But I wasn't just tired, I was exhausted. I was exhausted from living in survival mode, and I was exhausted from trying to keep the traumatic memories from coming up. I thought that if I could keep those memories away, that I really would be okay. Lie number two, I've just had too much caffeine today. And that is what I would tell people when they happen to notice that my hands were trembling a little bit. I would tell them that I drank too much coffee or I had too much caffeine. But the truth is that I had extreme levels of anxiety, and a lot of times it made me a little bit shaky. But I didn't want to admit that to people, or really even myself. So it was just easier to say that I drank a little bit too much coffee that day. Lie number three, I would tell people this lie when I needed to cancel plans. I would make some plans with my friends on a day that was okay, and I felt like I could do it and that I really was looking forward to getting together. But then that day would come and I might have been in a bad place or having a bad day, and I couldn't think about even leaving my house. So I would tell people that I had a headache. I did have a lot of headaches, but sometimes I would just say that because it was easier than saying I'm really struggling and having a hard time. People tend to accept when you tell them you have physical pain without question. But when you talk about having any emotional pain, they don't want to hear about it. So it was always just easier to say that I had a headache. Lie number four, I don't need to slow down. Slowing down meant that I would have time to think, and I didn't want to think. I did not want to think about all those things that I had stuffed into that metaphorical box and shut the lid on. Slowing down would have meant that some of those things might have come out of that box, and I wasn't prepared to deal with it at the time. So I kept myself busy as a way of avoiding dealing with the things that were bubbling to the surface. And I wasn't able to stop them from coming out of that box. And once they did, I was forced to slow down and take the time to start dealing with it. Lie number five, I don't need to take time off of work. I can do trauma recovery while I'm working in the same environment that almost killed me. This is probably the biggest lie I told myself, but I don't think it was necessarily a lie. It's something that I believed to be true at the time. And at the beginning of my journey, I had a person in my life who had walked a similar path already, and that person told me that you can't heal in the same environment that you got sick in. And at the time, I just kind of thought that might be true for some people, but not for me, because I honestly felt like I could do the recovery work and keep working at my job. But I came to learn that I was not an exception to that, and neither will you be. We absolutely cannot heal in the same environment that caused our injury. And looking back now, I can see that that was distorted thinking on my part, thinking that I could do all of this at once. I'm so grateful that I ended up taking the time away from work to go through the trauma recovery process and heal myself. Lie number six. This one's a little bit difficult for me to talk about, but I'm gonna do it anyways. And this lie that I would tell myself was, nobody will miss you if you're gone. And I told myself this lie more times than I care to admit. I told myself this lie every time I was desperately trying to come up with reasons to stay on this planet. And there were times that I couldn't think of any reasons at all. But I've come to realize that there is always, always a reason, even when it feels like there isn't. Don't give up. Lie number 7. After a few months in therapy, I'll be able to return to my job. In the beginning, when I took time off work, there was someone from my workplace that would call to check up on me, and I would always give them an update and tell them that I was feeling better and I'd probably be back to work in a month or so. As time went on, the frequency of these calls became less and less until they stopped altogether. And when the calls stopped, it felt like my employer had given up on me. And at the time, because I was in a bad place, I thought, if my employer is giving up on me, well, I might as well give up on myself. But then I started to realize that there is more to recovery than just getting better so you can go back to work. I was getting better so that I could have a better quality of life. I kept going no matter what, no matter how hard things got, and no matter how much I wanted to give up at times, I would never let myself do that. I might not have been going to a job every day, but I was doing some of the hardest work that I have ever done in my entire life. And it was also some of the most rewarding work. I'm so grateful that I no longer tell myself or anyone else these lies. These days, I can admit when I'm having a bad day or when I'm struggling, and I can do that without feeling any shame. And I also no longer worry about what anybody else thinks about how I handle my recovery, because I used to feel like people were judging me, even if they weren't. So if you're watching this and can relate to anything that I've been talking about, don't give up. There will be days when you feel like you can't go on, but believe me, you can. When you're struggling or having a bad day, call someone. Call a friend that you trust who can remind you of how important you are and how important your recovery is. And someone who is going to remind you that giving up is not an option. Keep doing the hard work and you will never regret it. You deserve peace, happiness, and healing in your life. Keep focusing on your strength, and when you're struggling, acknowledge and accept where you are at that moment in your journey. And don't beat yourself up for not being further along or where you think you should be in the recovery process. If beating ourselves up worked, I would have been cured 2 years ago because I relentlessly beat myself up until I learned that won't help me recover. You will get to where you're meant to be eventually, as long as you don't give up. Keep going. You've got this.